Welcome to the Modern CPA Success Show, the podcast dedicated to helping accounting firms stay ahead of the curve. Our mission is to provide you with the latest and greatest insights on cutting-edge tools, innovative marketing strategies, virtual CFO services, and alternative billing methods. Join us as we change the way people think about accounting.
Hey, Adam. How's it going today?
Doing well. How about you, Tom?
I'm doing really well. As we go through our podcast and we do our webinars, we talk a lot about our course, the VCFO Playbook course. Teach everything that we can about how we provide services, and thought maybe it'd be a good chance to dive into one of the topics today and talk a little bit about that one. I was thinking about pipeline. Sound like a good topic to go through?
Yeah, can I change my answer on how I'm feeling today? Yeah, pipeline's a great conversation. We can talk about that for sure.
So anyone who's wondering what pipeline is, you want to give some idea of what it is and why we focus on it?
Yeah, basically, whenever we talk to our clients, we're always talking about lead and lag indicators. And so, a good lead indicator, obviously, to sales is going to be your pipeline. And then, of course, you can go even further back and downstream, and you can look at things like, the activities that create the pipeline, which are natural conversations. But the pipeline is that pre-meeting where you have the ability to, look at what the future is going to be and how you're going to fill in those gaps. Because, nobody's ever met a forecast they didn't like, right? We can just throw a bunch of sales numbers up there and say, this is what we're going to do. But how are we actually going to execute on that? And so those pipeline conversations, regardless of the industry, because they take different forms, right? If you're selling projects versus even somebody that's in retail or something, the format of those meetings change a little bit,
right,
but the conversation's still super important. And it's not only to make sure that you're going to hit target, but it's also an opportunity from an operational standpoint to bring finance, operations, and pipeline kind of all together in one meeting.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I can talk just a little bit about what we actually do in those meetings. So I'll focus on service companies that lots of times do projects, as you mentioned those. But I'll be the one who's preparing for those conversations. And a lot of the data that we're bringing is one side is what's already been committed. So you've got some projects under contract that you can tell me for the next several months what that's going to be. And so we can compare that to what your capacity is and say that's 2/3, that you've got your pipeline 2/3 full for the next period. So now we can turn and say, then let's look at what potential is. And our clients have some kind of a customer relationship management system, Pipedrive or HubSpot or something like that. And so then we're pulling the data from there and sharing them back with it. Hey, here's what you're showing with the opportunities. And one thing that's pretty cool in those systems is you can look at like, what's your average sales cycle? How long does something take from the beginning to the end? What's the percent of these things that you win? And then how long do things last? And as you know, with that data, we can tell people, here's how big your pipeline should be if you're trying to hit a sales goal. So it is us feeding back information, but you've probably had the experience that I have is sometimes the customers look at their own data and they're learning things, or they're saying, well, this isn't right. And then you're helping them say, okay, well, then let's get it accurate so this can be a more fruitful conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's important to frame that this isn't an absolute, right? What's absolute is the financial statements. These are more guardrails, and so they're intended to just kind of be more of a, let's take the temperature of where we're at and what we need to improve. And so, especially in a service-based business, maybe you're going to break it down between recurring clients and new clients. So that, or you might break it down by geography or the size of clients, so that you can, because you're going to have different win rates. If it was just a cold lead versus a warm lead, those kind of things. So, and you can go back through and predict and look at your historical information. That's what's really cool. You can go back and look to see how much of that you've done historically. So like you said, the length of time to close, percentage win, those are very important in determining, when it's actually going to get started, that as well, because you want to kind of bake that into, how much do I need in my pipeline? And we can usually step back and with a formula, be able to tell a client like, hey, your pipeline should be, $3 million. You've only got 1.5. Seems a little light unless you're going to do better than what you did before, those kind of things. And so it's, again, it's not an absolute. They could win all that 1.5 and that's maybe all we needed and they could be great, but it gives them just a little bit of confidence and understanding like what they need to do. And then they start having these conversations about the lead indicators for it even getting to the pipeline in different avenues. And so it leads into a lot of strategic conversations about how to execute on bringing in new client work.
Yeah. And as you said, it's not precise. And as accountants, we love it to be precise. But whenever I tell them, okay, your pipeline should be 3 million, you're sitting at 1.5 million, I'm always then saying, is that about, are you feeling about the same? You got about half of what you need. And the majority of the time, the client is saying, yeah, that does feel about right, for what I'm looking at. You mentioned bringing in multiple groups like operations and sales. Sometimes those groups aren't together very often talking about projects. And I had an experience with one client where they were really busy. They were fortunate. And the sales guy had told me, hey, give me a 6 week lag between when we sign and start the work because we're really short on people. And it was a fantastic meeting because the VP of Ops there got there and he freaked out when he saw that. He said, it doesn't take 6 weeks. And so they sort of had an argument on there. And as it turned out, there was a particular skill set that they kept saying, we don't have that. But he's like, but all these other skills we do have. And I'm loving it because I'm like, great, we're resolving something really cool because you're sitting there having everything get delayed. And this guy's saying you need to change what the salespeople or telling customers. So it was a really cool chance that we had the people together and showed data that had them change what they were doing.
And the other thing is from a finance arm. So not only are you sitting back watching this interaction happen and then them
Hmm.
kind of working it out, you can always kind of come in and say, and financially speaking, I need
Yes.
this. So
Yes.
I hear what you're
Yeah.
saying. You can't do this and you have to do that. But just letting everybody know, as kind of the mediator in the room, this is what we have to have. So you two need to kind of
Yep.
work that out, and then we need to work backwards to kind of figure out, what we need to do. Another guardrail that's kind of cool to look at too, because especially with one of the industries that we work with, the pipeline, sometimes the length of time to close is really light. So they only have like a
Yeah.
what I mean by that is they only have like a 3 to 4 month visibility into what their pipe,
Hmm.
the work's going to
Yeah.
look like. And so 4 weeks out, you can tell them what their booked work is. So again, just defining
Yep.
that earlier before, that's people that have like committed, signed a contract, said, hey, we're going to get started. We know that we have carryover work that's going to hit these months. So you
Hmm.
can look historically back at what their catch up percentages are based on their pipeline size. So I know 4 months out, you should have 25% of your booked work in. 3 months out, it should be like
Mm.
50%. And then 2 months out, it's going to be 75%. So you can kind of look back there and you can measure those. Again, just as a rule of thumb, just taking the temperature, tell the client they're like, oh, I'm really worried. I've only got 25% booked work for January.
Uh,
It's like historically, you only have about 25%. And you can see
mhm.
you always catch up and you land at about 95%. Now, if you're at 40% booked work in January right now and you're historically at 25, then it's like, look at the pipeline. It's like, you might actually be pushing work into the following months if you
Yeah.
kind of continue that trend. Again, not an absolute, just good
Right.
conversation about, predicting what's going to happen kind of in the future. And it's an opportunity to connect sales and operations and finance all in one, kind of get us all rowing in the right direction.
Yeah. That's a cool measure. And also, I mean, you can also help that when people get busy, often they take their foot off the gas on the sales side. And so you could be looking out saying, yeah, I know you're really busy right now, but to give in your number, maybe you're 10% 4 months out. And so you give your chance yourself to give them a little bit of a kick, like, hey, you're about to come into a big valley if I look at the data and interpret it this way. And you might help that because we probably both had clients that got so busy and then 6 months later, they don't have enough work because they're like, we took all of our attention to focus on the operational part of that.
Yeah. I think the other thing is too, is like, it's also, there's also a forecasting opportunity here in a different way. So what I've had happen in these pipeline meetings before is, whenever you're talking about that battle between operations, the delivery of the work and
Hmm.
the sales side, I've also had it where sales team comes in and it's like, hey, I just killed a whale. This
Mm.
client is going to take so much of our time. It's a $2 million project, whatever that looks like. Everybody's super excited. It's going to feed us for the next 6 months. And then they
Yeah.
go, from a staffing perspective, we need to hire 6 more people.
Mm.
And then this is an opportunity again for finance to kind of step in, say, okay, like pause. I get it. You need 6 more people to execute this contract. Agreed. But now you've built, instead of a $7 million company, you need to, in the future, be an $11 million company,
Yep.
which means your pipeline outside of this deal, instead of being $2 million at any given time, needs to be like 3.5 million. You've never had a $3.5 million pipeline ever, like never even close. Are you sure you want to hire 6 people to execute this contract? Can we talk
Right.
about contractors? Can we talk about, like instead of like
Yes.
filling that void? Because what you're about ready to do is you're reacting to this big contract that eventually is
Hmm.
going to end. And then you've now built a bigger house, which is going to require a bigger pipeline. And then whenever you turn around and you tell the salesperson that's just high fiving about this whale that they just brought in, and you go, are you good with finding a $3.5 million pipeline after you know, got rid of this one, or
Yeah.
once the newness of this client wore off, and
Yep.
they're just like, well, no, like talk about like what have you done for me lately kind of crap. You know
Right.
what I mean? It's like, I just brought this whale and now you're telling me I got to do it again. It's like,
Yeah.
well, yes, if we're going to hire 6 more people.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's where you get, again, it's strategic conversations around the best way to even resource. So this pipeline meeting
Yeah.
can just deliver so much value.
Yeah, that's great. You are such a wet blanket though in that meeting, right? This guy's all excited about his deal, and you're like, here's what it means. But I do love the assumption that I walk in with is, well, we have to hire 6 people. And so I love that you're picking that one particular thing and saying, here's what it means if you're saying I'm hiring and they become employees for doing that, which is a great way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, for me as a finance person, I'm thinking, oh, this is cool. And then I look at the numbers and I'm like, ooh, wait a minute. Like, let's have this
Yeah,
conversation. And so,
great point.
and that was a real situation that I had with a client. And we ended up sourcing it with contractors. We didn't build a bigger
Mm,
house. We didn't, step up, ended up being very successful, very profitable. We paid a little bit of a premium for our contractors, but whenever the deal was done, we were still had our full capacity and we're hitting
yeah,
our numbers, and things we took the opportunity to get ahead financially and put some money in the bank because we were so profitable on that big contract.
yeah, that's cool. One of the things I've struggled with a little bit is I'm not a sales and marketing expert, right? So when things are difficult, sometimes it can be hard to know what advice you give them. And I've learned in that, but we've talked about some measures. So if someone said, if you're looking at someone saying you probably need to shorten your sales cycle, what advice might you give them to say, here are a couple places that you could look to make that sales cycle shorter? And maybe mention why you'd want a shorter sales cycle.
Well, yeah. So on the sales cycle side of things, that's going to go into that formula, right? Like the
Yep.
longer it takes you to get into the sales cycle, the bigger pipeline you're going to need. The shorter the sales cycle, the smaller the pipeline. So it's
Right.
in your, whenever you're educating the salesperson on these metrics, I think it's important for them to understand all the inputs and how they can
Hmm.
impact them. And so for advice in terms of that, sometimes it's just self-awareness, like them just
Hmm.
understanding how that input affects the total value of the pipeline. They figure out their own like efficiencies and logistics and follow-up conversations to have.
Yeah.
They change their meeting structure so that they're answering a lot of questions more in the upfront instead of like staggering them out and just trying to put a bunch of feelers out there. They're trying to
Yep.
get a little further in the sales process in that first meeting or two. They're a little tighter
Hmm.
on their follow-ups, those kind of things. They maybe change how they're pricing so that they can deliver a more functional price at a faster, instead of having to go away for 3 months and come back, or 2 weeks, or maybe they
Yep.
can figure out a way to get the pricing out within the next week. All those things are, really give you the ability to shorten up that delivery time, in order to close, and then ultimately lowers the pressure that you need on the size of the pipeline.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And a lot of it is some of our clients, some of my clients I've looked at don't have a good defined process. So even just getting that to know what happens when, so that you're not in the meeting saying, oh, I probably should follow up with that person versus our processes to do this kind of thing
Uh,
that's in there.
All right, Tom. So this might upset you and go against your grain. So,
Good.
but I am really just I absolutely cannot stand percentaging out wins. So anytime
Mm,
I've ever seen any calculation from software or people, they like to weight things. And for some reason that always just irritated me. So, and
mm,
again, I know what we're talking about. We're talking about estimates anyway, so it
right.
shouldn't really be that big of a deal. But whenever people break things out and they say, well, I'm going to weight this at 60% because maybe it's at a different stage in the pipeline. So sometimes
Hmm.
people do them at
Right.
different stages, which isn't fair because again, if it's a referral, maybe it's already an 80 percenter right out of the gate. So you have
Yep.
to be careful about putting percentage weights on stages. And then of course you can override it, based on gut and how you feel. The thing is like where I've found that to be challenging is clients never win 50% of the project or
Right.
40% of the project or 80%. You're either winning it or you're not. So the
Yeah.
way I prefer to look at the pipeline is looking at it like, basically like, hey, I'm feeling really good about this deal. And 50-50, probably not likely. And so those three things could be based on the relationship, could be based on the first call, it could be based on the stage, but I bucket the full dollar amount into those three
Yeah.
buckets, and then I layer them on top of each other so that I can say, hey, your total pipeline needs to be this big and you have this much of it. And then what I can do is I can take the highly likely stuff and stack it on top of their booked work to show them, hey, if we get all the highly likely stuff on top of your booked work, we only need this much left, right? We only need $100,000. And then I look into the 50-50 work and I see how big the 50-50 work is. And that 50-50
Hmm.
work's I got $1 million. Okay, well, we only have to win, you know, 10% of these contracts in here in order to get you what we need for booked work for the next couple months. So rather than like
Yeah.
parsing it out and say, and again, I don't know, maybe you prefer the weighting method either based on
Hmm.
whatever, but for me it's either I won it or I didn't, and I like to put it in just like three simple buckets.
Yeah.
And I did have a client add a fourth bucket on me, which I understood and I was fine. So it went from likely to all but one, and all but one
Hmm.
meant like actually I'm just waiting on a signature, so it's like
Okay.
beyond likely. So they wanted to see it layered in like booked, all but one, or and then likely. They wanted to see those things stacked on top of each other in like a bar graph against the target for revenue for the
Yeah. I was hoping to disagree with you because I thought it'd be fun to have that, but we're in the same place. The main reason I agree with you, Adam, is when you wait, it's easy to sort of ignore the deal itself and say, well, I only had it at 20%, so I'm not arguing. And when you actually see the deals, a common thing I will find is either your pipeline, say it's 1.5 million, but you've got two deals in there that say are 500,000 each. And so you're like, yeah, your pipeline's this big, but win both of these and you're thrilled, and lose both of them, your pipeline just fell apart. But if you put a couple deals in, you're looking specifically, you can look like, if I'm at the beginning of October looking at October, you can look at the deals in October and say, can you really win and get this much revenue of these three deals? And you've got 3 weeks left. And then they're like, well, it's going to take a week to sign and a week to get the team. So no, we can't. And that seems important to look at the specific deal that you're talking about. And then I do similar to you, where we're saying we call it best, middle, and worst case. So if I take what you already have and put your worst case on top of it, here's what you look like, in the same discussion that you talked about
month. Yeah.
that was in there.
And I mean, the fun stuff and being able to do that and talk about specific clients is, any of our clients that are service based, that are doing project based work, there's a lot of different tools and a lot of things that you can bring. The conversation's not as specific. Like whenever you think about like a retailer or somebody like that, like
Hmm.
why would you have a pipeline conversation about that? Well, just the focus shifts, right? So now you're talking about seasonality potentially. You're talking about product sales. So now you're talking about which products are selling, when they're
Yep.
selling. You're having sales conversations. By sales, I mean like sales discounts, like pricing. Hey, do
Hmm.
we need to get more of this in? Do we have high margins here? How can we bring sales up in this month or this next quarter? Those kind of things. So you're having maybe pricing conversations and seasonality conversations and those kind of things for product placement and stuff, if you're dealing in like more of a retail environment and not a project based. So the
Yeah.
the value of that conversation is still there. It's just the focus kind of shifts and maybe the analysis is a little bit different.
Yeah. Hopefully this is a good summary for people what we do with pipeline. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we have our course pipelines module in there, and we'll show you the tools that we use and go into even more depth in this. But if we're looking to advise clients and say that we're starting to look, we want people looking forward, pipeline is one of the great places where you're looking forward. And we've talked about the different ways that it can help people in doing that.
Absolutely.
Good. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website, summitcpa.net, to get more tips and strategy for achieving modern CPA firm success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.